Monarch Legacy of Monsters episode 9 just came out, and this was by far the best episode of this season for me. Since episode 1 I thought was decent, everything else has really been a slog to get through. There was a couple episodes that were okay in there that kind of had cliffhangers, and I was like, oh, maybe the next one will be good, and then they just veered way off course. So I think this was far and away the best episode. We finally start getting some answers for things, some explanations. They finally addressed Kurt Russell's age, which was something I complained about in like episode 1 or 2. So I'm glad that that was part of the story. There's still a couple things I don't like, but a lot of that was unfortunately set up in prior episodes and there's no way to undo it. And really, this show probably should have just been the past timeline and been like 5 episodes instead of being 10, and really messing around with all this love triangle nonsense in the present time and all this drama and these really 3 unlikable characters in the present timeline. The past timeline, my biggest issue is that the entire story has literally just been, hey, we need to get funding for this, and they get it at the last minute. And hey, we need to get funding for this, but no one believes us, and they get it at the last minute. And I think they've done it like 4 times at this point. If we had cut out all the fat from episode 1 to 9 for the past timeline, I think it could have been pretty solid. Let's just talk about this episode specifically, because this was definitely the most interesting one, and unsurprisingly, most of it takes place in the past timeline. We're a couple years after Keiko's death. I'm not exactly sure how this works, but Randa has her kid. His name is Hiroshi Randa, so legally it seems like he's Randa's kid. Not exactly sure how that worked, if the implication was that Keiko and him got married at some point, don't know. But they're gonna go do this experiment. Hiroshi's nervous. It's a decent scene. You can kind of tell that they seem awkward and uncomfortable when they're trying to make him feel better. And Lee gives him this little pocket knife as like a gift, which will come up later in the episode. So there's really not too much to say about it. They're just saying goodbye to him. So the guy who's the general who kind of takes credit for everything is explaining to these other political figures that Project Hourglass is 20 years of Monarch's work and blah, blah, blah. And this is the way that they're going to connect their world to the world of the Titans. You can see that they're kind of paralleling the space race. This is 1962. The moon landing was 1969. The scientist who created the gamma detector thing to call the Titans is there, and they're trying to call the Titans here pretty much to open up the doorway between the Hollow Earth and our world, is a simple explanation of what's going on here. What I just showed was the space unit that's going to follow the monster down. This is the more advanced gamma thing. And their whole plan that he's explaining is they're going to lure the Titan up here, let him eat this essentially and go away, and then they're just going to follow him in to their world. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You can see here Shaw and a couple other guys drop down into the Hollow Earth behind the Titan, and the whole time the general guy is explaining that the only thing that we know of that stabilizes the pathway or the door is a Titan. So by bringing them close to the door and then following them in, they can travel through when it's stable. I'm fine with all this because you have to have some kind of explanation for why we can't get into the Hollow Earth whenever we feel like it. Obviously in Godzilla vs. Kong, they do. So we have seen the Hollow Earth recently, but we had this 50-ish year gap where they didn't follow them down or try to make their way into the Hollow Earth at some time prior to the movies. Everything goes crazy. You can see everything's getting destroyed. It's not as stable as they thought. And at this point, I doubt we'll be in the past timeline anymore. And also in this episode, we do get a little nod of Randa before he turns into John Goodman, which we saw in the first couple minutes of episode 1 on Skull Island. And you can kind of see it here. Randa's outfit is really similar. He's just missing the hat. And the general says, what the hell happened? And Randa just says flat out, I don't know. I don't know what happened. Which is nice because this is a good character thing for him when the entire time he's been insistent that he's correct and very sure of himself, and he's willing to theorize all the time, and he has all these wild ideas. To just see him kind of look defeated and just straight up be like, I have no fucking clue what just happened. So I like this little moment here for Randa. And then we see here, obviously, Hiroshi finds out that Lee promised that he would come back, and Lee told him that they had people who were trying to make it safe and blah, blah, blah. And now he feels like he broke that promise, which will be important for Hiroshi later in this episode. So obviously the first 10 minutes was really a solid start for the show. We get the little theme song, and we come back to Kentaro. He's confused. He's like, where am I? And Tim has to just flat out tell him, like, look, Lee, Kate, and May are dead. And Verduga at this point is like, you're done with us. The best thing you can do is go live your life and go home. Which is all true, but this moment would mean a lot more if Monarch hadn't, like, captured and released them multiple times throughout this season, and then given them resources to follow all over the world until something happened. when they specifically said that they have no experience and don't know what they're doing. So it could be a really good moment in a better show. We have kids who are all in their early 20s, an artist, a computer programmer, and a teacher, and none of them have any experience with this stuff, and Monarch just threw them in there, and now they're like, okay, we're done with you. I mean, I guess it's good for making Monarch evil, but it also makes Monarch seem really illogical, which has been kind of an issue all season. So Kentaro's begging, and he's like, there has to be something we can do, and Verduga says there is, live, which I'll just go ahead and say I hate that line so much, and it gets used in so many things. But aside from that, this moment would mean a lot more if everything else about their relationships hadn't been so terrible. Like, he just met Kate a few days ago, who is his dad's second family as far as he's concerned. May was his girlfriend that they broke up months prior. I mean, at least you could see him being upset about her, regardless of how bad their chemistry is on screen. And Lee, he also just met a few days ago, who he was pissed off at the last time that he saw him. So this whole scene just feels kind of hollow. And I really don't like that they used this scene to kind of springboard Kentaro into being a big dick later in the episode. Like, his character reminds me of the bad parts of Kylo Ren, where Adam Driver did a great job with the performance, but his character was just so all over the place that you have no idea who he actually is. Except this show doesn't have Adam Driver to at least give it a good performance. So this whole thing just feels really empty to me. And again, the present timeline is just the weak point of this show. There's just no getting around it. We finally go to the Hollow Earth to see Kurt Russell and May together, and they don't know where Kate is. And this is a pretty neat scene, and it's cool that they're in the Hollow Earth. And this is just kind of a nitpick because we're dealing with unreal physics here. But the other times that people have been to the Hollow Earth, they were in a spaceship and struggled to get there, and they just fell in a hole, and they just woke up okay. So that's kind of meh. But this is a pretty neat scene, and we finally get to see what happened to Lee when he went to the Hollow Earth the first time. And because the budget's not super big, I wouldn't be too hard on how it looks. And I actually do think it looks kind of neat with this ethereal thing they have, and the colors are kind of all over the place because it's a different world, so it's unreal, which is nice at least. Lee grabs May and is like, we need to move now because there's these lightning bolt things raining down on the ground, and you can see where they're going to land because there's like a little build up right before on the ground. So they're just running around those spots, and the lightning bolts are hitting everywhere. And this is all fine. And Lee explains to May we need to hurry up because the longer you're in here, the longer you're in here, which sounds absurd, but at least he explains it in just a minute here. They want to find Kate and get the hell out of there. Again, this is all stuff that is good story-wise, like they're stressed out about their friend missing, but it would work so much better if you actually gave a shit about the person that was missing, which is what I was talking about when I said the issues really stem from the previous ones because they can't be undone, obviously. You know, hard to blame this episode for that, but the show kind of is what it is at this point. We're glad we get the good episode, but it doesn't hit quite as hard as it could have if it had been in a better show. We get another good Randa scene here in the past where we just kind of see him being upset and he's at his desk and just kind of trying to work through it because at this point, obviously, he's lost Keiko, he's lost Lee, he doesn't really have any answers for his research, and everything's kind of gone to shit. It's another moment that's good for him to see where he's just really vulnerable. Randa gets a call from General Puckett, and I don't know why I can never remember his name. His name's General Puckett. And he calls Bill Randa and explains, like, look, because of the loss of life and the lack of answers, funding's gone. And this is what I meant about the plot point for the past timeline being kind of repetitive, because it really is just, we need funding, we got it, we lost it, rinse and repeat. And again, this would be a really good scene if they hadn't made Puckett such an asshole all season long, where he apologizes to Randa because he believes him and he believes in the project, but it's out of his hands. And it's nice to see him actually apologize. It could have been really good if they had been a little bit adversarial throughout the season, but Puckett still had good points instead of he's like a racist, sexist asshole who just wants to shut down their science and thinks it's bullshit and all that. If he was just skeptical and was like, look, this is the reality we're dealing with, then when he explains to Randa here, Randa says, well, what about the moon landing? They have nothing to show for it. And how many people will die pursuing that? And Puckett says, look, people can see the moon. They can't see what we're looking at. So like, that would be a really, really good scene if he had been a better character throughout the season. And these are the kind of things that I wonder if we had focused just on the past timeline, or like 90% on the past timeline, if they would have had a little bit more time with Puckett to flesh him out, and this would have been a really nice payoff. This is a really good scene. It would just be so nice if they had had a better relationship in every scene prior. They have this little dialogue here where Puckett explains, like, look, there's not an imminent threat, like the one that we saw with Godzilla. And Randa says, what? So why don't we just bring one up here and then show them that we have an imminent catastrophe on our hands? And Puckett's like, what? and hope it's smaller than Godzilla and willing to negotiate. And these are the kind of points he should have made earlier in the season because they were valid points the entire time. They just didn't get made. Or they got made in a way that was very antagonistic. You can tell he's frustrated and upset, and he knows that they can't find answers without funding. So essentially, this is a way of indirectly shutting him down, and he can't really do anything about it. And Randa kind of blames himself, and Puckett says, no, I could have stopped it. And then he gives the quote about older men decide the wars, but the young men must die. And Puckett says, I assure you it's a lot worse when you know the young men who died. He was my friend too. And all that stuff is good, but would have been really good if we didn't have Puckett telling Lee that he was going to demote him for doing what he thought was right and essentially get fucked. So if their relationship had been a little bit better throughout the season, this would be like a great moment instead of just a good one. And you can see Randa's like verging on obsessed and says, I can't let it go, and I won't. And Puckett says, you know, that boy has lost his mom and his uncle. Don't take his father too. And again, this would all be really good stuff if he hadn't been so antagonistic all season. And obviously we know that in about a decade, in like the early to mid 70s, Randa does die on Skull Island, so he doesn't let it go. I don't know how much more of that we can see in the show though, unfortunately. We go back to Lee, and this is where we see him wake up in the hospital. He wakes up and keeps yelling he wants Bill Randa. He's freaking out, and nobody's answering him, and they're speaking Japanese. He takes the nurse hostage with an electrical cord and apologizes to her, and just keeps yelling for Bill Randa. And then he sees the moon landing on TV, and he's just really confused as he's wandering around because he's woken up in the 80s, so it's been 20 years since he went down and then came back up, even though for him, we're going to find out it was only a few minutes. Eventually, Hiroshi shows up and shows him the knife that Lee gave him before he left, and he explains that it's been 20 years and Randa's dead. And obviously, Lee has a freak out and kind of a panic attack and just collapses. That was 1982. Now back in the present with Kentaro, he's with his mom. His mom came to get him from the hospital because they airlifted him to Tokyo from Kazakhstan. And she's saying, you know, do you want to get your old job back? Do you want to get a new job? And she's just trying to kind of help him feel better. And he acts like a dick about it. And he's upset, obviously, because he has survivor's guilt. He's like, I should have been with Kate and the rest of them. And his mom's like, don't say that. And he's essentially saying that he was scared and just didn't act, even though he wanted to. Again, would be fine. This obviously worked really well as a plot point in Godzilla Minus One. But in Godzilla Minus One, this happened immediately, and you ended up having that character development throughout the entire movie. And obviously in this show, we have about an episode left, so I don't think we're going to get very much time with this. Which again, if they had cut the fat off this show, which was like 2/3 of the season, we could have had some really fleshed out nice characters, even in the present timeline, as bad as the chemistry has been between the three protagonists. And Kentaro's mom might be the most likable person throughout the whole season, because she doesn't really do anything dickish. Even here, she's sympathetic, and she's like, no one expects you to go back to normal, but you have to let yourself have the emotions. You can't just bottle them up. And she says, what are you going to do? And he says, what can I do? Monarch told me to stay out of it. And she says, when have you ever listened? And again, this would be nice if he hadn't literally just been dragged around by the nose all season and treated like a bitch and acted like a bitch. And he literally did what he was told all season. We go to Monarch headquarters, and the worst part of this episode, by far, is whoever picked this song. It's the same tech lady that we've seen do everything throughout the season, and she's listening to some new rap music. It's absolute dog shit. Not a huge deal, I just wanted to bitch about it. And this is just another one of those things that's not a huge detail, but it makes Monarch feel really incompetent as a corporation. That this one lady is the one who's solving every single problem, but whatever. So what she's saying is, it's a signal. Someone's trying to signal to us from the Hollow Earth, is the long and short of it. And they do some sci-fi gibberish, and she puts up a signal, and it gets cleaned up, and blah, blah, blah. And she says it's a signal. Someone's trying to contact us from the Hollow Earth. This is what we're looking at. Lee wakes up after his panic attack, and Hiroshi's there, and they have a little bit of dialogue, and Lee is being treated like a prisoner because of the Cold War. They don't know if he's radioactive. His age doesn't make any sense. And Hiroshi says, none of it makes any sense. It goes beyond logic. And Lee says, and beyond logic. And then Hiroshi says, lies truth. And this is one of those things that I just hate that movies do in general. When they do these things that are supposed to sound really smart, but then you think about them for like 10 seconds, and you're like, well, that doesn't really make any sense. That beyond logic lies truth. Presumably, whatever the truth is, you can get to with logic, even if we don't understand the logic yet. So it's just a nonsensical line, but they keep using it, and it's their little bonding moment. Hiroshi asks what happened, and Lee explains finally what happened in the Hollow Earth to him. He says that their flight into the Hollow Earth was completely uncontrolled and they lost one of the guys during their flight in. And again, just another thing that is really stupid. And I can only assume that this was to have Lee show his face so we can tell which one he is he immediately takes off his helmet in this other place, not knowing whether or not the air is breathable or infected or whatever. I mean, he's supposed to be at least pretty smart, so just kind of a dumb thing there. He explains that their immediate priority was just getting the hell out of there. So they tried to make contact. They did a little bit of recon around the area. They all took off their helmets, so I guess they figured, fuck it. They encountered a giant titan that they didn't know what it was, and obviously it wrecked their shit. Lee says that he tried to evac immediately, which it seemed like they were already doing that anyway. But then we get this little montage of like slow motion shots of them all dying. And this is a pretty cool one. And obviously this is how Lee knows about the lightning bolts when he's with May in the present timeline. And then we can see how the physics of this place is just completely destroying him. And then he wakes up in the woods alone. Hiroshi explains how they found him in the woods outside of this shrine and how they found a rift in their mythography. And Lee's kind of laughing. And that's his backstory for the Hollow Earth. So you can see he was in there a super short time and jumped 20 years. I'm assuming that won't be consistent just because, but who knows. Lee tells Hiroshi Rando was right about everything, and Hiroshi says no, he was crazy. And this is where we find out that Lee gets put into that Monarch nursing home by Hiroshi. And this is what I was talking about when I said there's some stuff that I just don't like in this show. And this whole plot point of them chasing Hiroshi around for like 9 episodes just for him to end up seemingly he's going to be the villain. I just really don't like that, and it makes it kind of feel like it doesn't serve a purpose. In my last video, I said that I thought Lee was going to accidentally trigger the events in Godzilla King of the Monsters, where a bunch of Titans came out, but now I'm kind of thinking that Hiroshi might intentionally be doing it because he's the villain with some crazy idea about the monsters deserving the Earth, or who knows what his motives are, but I guess we'll see. Hiroshi gives him the knife back as kind of a fuck you, and he says, you know, we lived for hundreds of thousands of years alongside them until you three showed up. And he's kind of blaming them for the Titans existing and messing stuff up. I'm assuming this is why he's going to be the villain, although it's a really tenuous motive at best. And then to fully seal his dickery, Hiroshi says this madness consumed all the family that I had, and I buried 3 empty boxes. And Lee says it wasn't madness. And Hiroshi says then it was a choice, and that might actually be worse. So he's just full-on asshole. And this could have been the kind of thing, again, that'd be interesting if we'd seen anything from him this season, other than these weird flashes in the present timeline, and then him as a small child. And then we go to his nursing home. We get a montage of him being drugged every day and just watching TV and kind of doing nothing. And eventually he sees Godzilla on the TV. And this is kind of what wakens him from being on the drugs and just kind of checked out. And I can't tell if this guy on the right is supposed to be the one who invented the gamma thing, because they don't say his name or anything, so I don't know. But I'm assuming there's some reason for him to be there. We get this one little scene with Kate and Lee where she's like, oh, that's what happened. And I guess their plan is just to walk around yelling Kate. And on one hand, it's like, what else are they going to do? On the other, it's like, you know you're in a world full of giant monsters, so it doesn't seem like the best plan. Oh well, I guess. Hiroshi shows up to his place to get some papers, and Kentaro's already there looking through stuff. And Kentaro's pissed off at him for not checking in to see if they made it out alive, because Hiroshi's like, oh, I haven't had a chance to go talk to your mom yet. And Kentaro's just pissed off at him. And this is another scene that could have been good if we cared about any of them. But the whole time, Hiroshi is just like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I hurt you guys, I had work to do. And Kentaro's just pissed off, so he's kind of like, fuck you. And then Hiroshi doesn't even like try to justify it. He's like, you weren't supposed to find out about that part of my life. So at no point does it try to make him redeemable. And then Kentaro tells him that Kate died. And obviously the dad is like, oh, you're just trying to hurt me. And then he has a breakdown. And I get Kentaro being pissed off, obviously. But he just goes like full on dick mode and rubs it in his face. And is like, this is your fault. And if you hadn't been so secretive, she wouldn't have become part of my life and she might not be dead. And it's just a weird character direction for him to go when the whole first part of the season, he was the one who wanted to find their dad the most. And then when his dad disappeared in the desert right before Godzilla came up, he completely flipped. And I don't know, that's just kind of weak to me. Like, I get being frustrated, but at the same time, they didn't know what his dad was doing. Even Lee said he might have been trying to lure him somewhere. So to just go straight from like wanting to find him to not giving a shit to rubbing it in his face that he got his daughter killed is all kind of a very drastic and quick switch that he did. I'm not particularly sure what to think about it, but it kind of rubs me the wrong way though. The final scene, we go to Kate, and she wakes up in the woods, kind of lost and like, where the hell am I? And she sees a giant boar tree titan thing. And this is another one of those things that feels like they did it. They were like, oh fuck, we need 30 more seconds. The thing comes up and sniffs her face, and then walks away like 100 yards, and then charges at her. Doesn't really make much sense to me. I thought maybe they were going to say she had some kind of connection with the Titans because they implied she had one with Godzilla, but whatever. Obviously, Kate's not going to die here right at the end of this episode. The tree boar titan thing charges at her and gets an arrow to the neck, which brings it down. Make of that what you will. And we get like a shadowy silhouette, and it's Keiko. And I don't know if this was supposed to be a twist. I don't think so. I think even when she died in episode 1, I thought she might end up being merged with like one of the bugs and then have some kind of influence later. I didn't expect her to just straight up live, but either way, now she's alive, same age, and in the Hollow Earth with Kate. So I guess next episode hopefully will be a good one. I'm expecting it to be jam-packed now that we filled like 6 to 7 of our 10 episodes with no plot at all, and they're trying to jam it all into the last 2. We're going to have Kate and Keiko, I'm assuming, meet up with Lee and May, and then they're all going to escape together. Kentaro, no clue. I guess he'll meet back up with them, and Hiroshi will presumably become the bad guy, and my guess is release a bunch of Titans at once, which is going to be the King of the Monsters setup, but don't know. So yeah, this was by far the best episode. I don't think it was close at all. And I think if we had spent like 80-20 past timeline to present timeline, this show would go from being like a 4 or a 3 to like an 8. Because the past timeline is interesting, even if it's a little bit repetitive. The present timeline just felt like a completely disconnected different show. But yeah, this has already gone way longer than I wanted it to, so I'll just end it here. And I'll be back for the finale. If you're here, let me know what you thought of this episode. If you're still watching, presumably you've liked the whole season. You're not just suffering through it. Let me know. I'll try to respond. Like and subscribe and all that shit. See ya. Thanks.